Lord Dalbert Anton said, all power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. In the Catholic Church, the hierarchy have absolute power. They are the ones who make the law, enforce it, and also sit in judgment when the laws are broken. So, will the hierarchy ever justly judge itself or any ordained man in situations of abuse? In the church, patriarchy rules, and women continue to suffer from untold violence in every sector of her life, in the home, in society, and even in the church. Scripture is used to reinforce the submission of women to man. 1 Corinthians 11 speaks of marriage relationships, places man as head of his wife. It says, I quote, man ought not to have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God. But woman is the reflection of man. Woman was made from man. Woman was created for the sake of the man. Therefore, she has to wear a symbol of authority on her head, which is the veil. The single issue of authority of man over woman is the root of all violence to women, especially in the family. So also in the church, man sees himself as superior to woman. As man, he only can represent God. So he has placed himself as leader and created all the laws that govern women's lives. Even in the 21st century, when the women's liberation movement has made great strides in society, Catholic women continue to be submissive to men in the church and in the family. Women in the church are brainwashed to believe that they are inferior and subject to man. So they accept this subservient status and do not question it. We are all aware of the excuses men give for beating their wives or inflicting emotional and economic abuse on their wives. The common refrain is, my wife has to obey me. Fortunately for women, the establishment of the Charter of Human Rights has compelled every country to make laws that forbid violence to women, making it punishable under law. But in the Catholic Church, you never hear a single homily that speaks against domestic violence to women. It is not a sin. What is women's lived experience in this scenario? My positions in the church helped me to get in touch with women at all socioeconomic levels of society and understand their situation. Poverty is another reality of violence that affects women's lives in many South countries, particularly Asia. Poverty forces women to work both at home and take up employment outside the home. Most often, this employment is hard, dirty, and low-paying work, where women are exploited financially and even sexually by their employers. In India, we also have the violence of the caste system. Because of their poverty, they do not have the time nor the means to take action under the law. Poor men are also in the same predicament. They engage in hire and fire work. So often, women have their husbands at home without jobs. They harass their wives for money to drink away their troubles. Women suffer violence if they do not give their husbands the money for alcohol. Middle class and well-to-do women also suffer domestic violence. Often they are silent about the violence to save face and give the impression that she is in a happy marriage. The women's movement has been able to draw out some of these women to take action. Women can be highly paid professionals, but in the family, they are subject to their husbands. Women who have approached priests in the confessional to talk about violence are told that it is their cross, that they have to carry. So they should forgive their husbands. They are also told that it is their duty to keep the family together. Taking action can result in the breakup of the family. So women are silenced. Recently, on the Feast of the Sacred Heart, which is my parish feast, the priest gave a homily on love. He said that love is what keeps the family together. So we should love everyone in the family unconditionally. While there are those, he said, in the family with bad habits who disturb the peace in the home, he pointed out love heals and helps them to come back within the fold of love. The majority in the congregation present in the church were women. So the message that is given to the women, loving can convert a violent or drunken husband. Violence in the church. The denial of equal rights to women in the church is violence to her dignity and equality. Women are kept subject to men, so she has to approach men for spiritual guidance, counseling, and spiritual growth. Many women approaching priests with a problem are in a vulnerable situation. Some priests have taken advantage of their situation and have abused women sexually as well. Religious sisters are the most vulnerable to sex abuse by clerics in the church. I have been involved in advocacy for women who have been sexually abused in the church since 2008, when I first received complaints of abuse from women by priests. The priests have mostly used spirituality to abuse. One priest told a young woman who was emotionally upset that he was showing her God's love by having sex with her. Another told a sister that since both of them were not married, having sex was not a sin. But she did not have the courage to tell him that she did not want to have sex with him. He later asserted that the sex was consensual. Both men use their spiritual authority to explain away their wrongdoing and make it appear legitimate, not bothering whether the woman wanted to have sex with him or not. In church, women are abused within the context of receiving spiritual guidance and counseling. Women who suffer from either grief, emotional trauma, domestic violence, depression, etc., are all vulnerable to abuse. Most often, women blame themselves for attracting abuse. Women are socialized to believe that they are the temptress Eve. This idea comes from Tertullian views on women. He said, "Do you not know that you are an Eve? The sentence of God on your sex, on this sex of your lives, the guilt must of necessity live too. You are the devil's gateway. You destroyed so easily God's image, man." In the 12th century, Hildegard of Bingen moved her monastery of nuns from the proximity to the monks' monastery after a novice became pregnant and was sent away. She went to the garden instead and took poisonous herbs and died. Hildegard took on the hierarchy and stood her ground to make this move because she felt strongly that this is what God wanted her to do. The entrenched patriarchy that exists in the Catholic Church has prevented women from taking any action against abuse. When I approached a Mother General in Switzerland, where I was visiting, and asked her what she was doing about the abuse of religious sisters in the church, especially in India, she said, "We deal with this in-house." It means that the sister who has been abused is silenced by religious authority. If she is pregnant, she is quietly sent to a place to have the child. If she wants to keep the child, she has to leave the congregation. If she gives it up for adoption, she has the option to return to the congregation. No one thinks about the rights of the child. In India, in the state of Kerala, we have had 20 suicides of young sisters in recent times. No one has yet come up with the reasons for why these young women have taken their lives. We have heard of the Magdalen laundries in Ireland, of graves of buried fetuses on convent lands. A large part of the history of the Catholic Church. Celibacy is the story of the degradation of women, and an invariable consequence is frequent abortions and infanticide. If we examine the history of the Catholic Church, you will observe how wives were discarded by priests who wanted to rise in the ranks of hierarchy. You must remember that celibacy was not there permanently. It came and it went according to the whims of the popes. In the 4th century of the Christian era, the Council of Elvira in Spain, decree number 43, declared, a priest who sleeps with his wife the night before Mass will lose his job. In the 4th century CE again, Pope Siricius left his wife in order to become Pope. He decreed that priests may no longer sleep with their wives. In the 5th century, St. Augustine wrote, nothing is so powerful in drawing the spirit of a man downwards as the caresses of a woman. In the 6th century, at the Second Council of Tours, it was declared any cleric found in bed with his wife would be excommunicated for a year and reduced to the lay state. In the 9th century, the Council of Aix-la-Chapelle openly admitted that abortions and infanticide took place in convents and monasteries to cover up activities of uncelibate clerics. In the 11th century, Pope Urban II had priests' wives sold into slavery. Children were abandoned. A number of popes from the 4th to the 10th century were the sons of popes or other clergymen. Between the 15th and 16th centuries, 6 popes had illegitimate children. Once celibacy was made mandatory, sex abuse of women in the church became covert. Victims were silenced, and the crime was covered up by the pontifical secrets, which was only removed by Pope Francis in the year 2019. The violence done to women in the course of church history has never been acknowledged as such. It is the women who have had to bear the brunt over the ages of the painful discipline of priestly celibacy. All through history, women have been despised for their relationship with priests, while the priests have more or less retained their reputation as gentlemen of the cloth. The clearest example of the maltreatment of women by celibate priesthood was the age of witchcraft. There were appalling pornographic undertones to the persecution. Women were despised by their priestly inquisitors. According to the stereotype, they were tools of Satan, temptresses, sexual traps, especially for men who had chosen to live without female companionship. The persecution of witches shows celibates with unconscious malevolence, revenging themselves on women for the sacrifice they had made of their own sexuality. When confronted with actual cases of abuse, most often priests have said, the church never claims there is no sin within the church. We are not angels. We are human beings of flesh and blood. So some omissions and failures can happen, but the church is perennially on the path of renewal and reformation. We are trying to deal with these problems and such allegations. But to date, no sister or woman has received justice in the church. The big meeting called by Pope Francis in 2019, with so much of hype and press coverage, has not translated into concrete action on the ground. It is business as usual, silencing and cover up of abuse. The large number of survivors of abuse who held a parallel meeting in 2019, which I was also a part of, are frustrated and have now turned to the UN Human Rights Commission for Justice. Vivencio O. Beleno points out, when men in authority, cardinals, bishops, rectors, abbots, confessors, professors, are having or have had an unacknowledged, secret, active sex life under the guise of celibacy, an atmosphere of tolerance of behaviors within the system is made operative. It is dismissed as a misdemeanor, a weakness, a sin that has to be forgiven, not as a crime that has to be punished. The image of a priest as a man of God, acting in the name of God, has led many priests to use his position as a spiritual person to lure or trap his victims. The victims are literally tongue-tied when a priest abuses them. They do not know how to respond. They know what he is doing is wrong, yet they wonder, how can a man of God do wrong? They are confused. Like one victim said to her abuser, "What you are doing is wrong." And he responded, "I'm showing you God's love." People who have not experienced abuse comment about the length of time that elapses between the abuse and the reporting of the abuse. They fail to understand that first the victim herself has to process the experience of abuse. Victims know that people will not believe them because the priest is held in such high esteem in the community. Catholics are indoctrinated to believe that the priest is in the place of God and he is to be respected as such. The realm of the spiritual is a human and social space which is culturally imbued with connections to the divine. Hence, religious power becomes potent and intoxicating, both for those who render religious service as well as for their recipients. This power protects the clerics because the people feel they need to honor that power to obtain their own salvation. The church has never felt compelled to deal decisively with the problem of clergy sex abuse. People are blindsided by clerical spiritual power. Therefore, spiritual power becomes a cover for sexual abuse. Why is it so difficult for people to call out the abuse? The image of the priest as alter Christus, that is another Christ. According to Canon Law 129, the power and authority of the priest comes from divine authority. So people feel they cannot judge him, only God can judge him. Medieval historian Meke de Jong states, it was from sexual purity that priesthood has believed to derive its power. People see celibacy as a boundary that keeps them safe with the priest. As a celibate, they see him as being beyond human frailty. People go to a priest with many of their intimate problems in their marriage, especially women, teenagers with sexual and relationship problems. So, when he takes advantage of them, he is committing sexual and spiritual abuse. People get completely confused. When a priest intrudes upon a victim's body space, the deeply ingrained respect for this holy man keeps them confused and silent and later leads to mental problems for a victim of abuse. When I reported the abuse of a young woman by a priest, the bishop told me that it was not abuse, but consensual sex. A sin perhaps, but not a crime. When complaints are made, the priest may be transferred to another parish or given a light punishment, but never reformed or ever defrocked. So the problem continues. The institutional church is seen as complicit by turning a deaf ear to complaints, often targeting advocates. From my experience, another modus operandi of the institution is silencing of victims using ecclesial power and money while making advocates appear as troublemakers in communities. Most victims in their naivete succumb to silencing when approached by their bishop because of his influence and juridical power in the community. In doing so, all ethics, church and ecclesial laws suffer a heavy casualty to save face. There cannot be consensual sex when two persons are in an unequal power relationship. Those who approach the priest for any service are always in a vulnerable position in relation to the priest. Hence, adult victims of abuse cannot be accused of consensual sex. When it comes to women religious reporting abuse, one detects a great fear, as a survey done by Anne Wolfe at the University of St. Louis reports. Many feel shame or guilt and recognize that they could have a lot to lose if they come forward. This is indicative of the oppressive power of church authority, which does not make for true mission of Christ. The St. Louis study indicates that abuse often has had devastating psychological effects on the women. Many nuns said that they were left with feelings of anger, shame, anxiety, and depression. Some said they had considered leaving religious life. A few said they had attempted suicide. A research done in Australia stated the failure to address sexual scandals, harassment, and sexual injustice in the church was experienced as a serious barrier, along with the church's reluctance to reflect on the underlying causes of the problem. The gap between pastoral practice and official church teaching, particularly in the area of sexual morality, was noted. A submission from a married couple highlighted the issue of clergy sexual abuse involving exploitative relationships between priests and adult women. It was noted that the sexualization of the relationship was normally at the instigation of the priest at a time of personal crisis or difficulty in the life of the woman. The theological underpinnings of abuse, the sin of Eve, has been transferred onto all women who are described as sinful creatures, particularly as seductress. Tertullian also, as I said earlier, described women as the devil's gateway. The impact of Christian teaching and images of God, man, and woman has relegated women to the position of subservience and submission to the will of God and men in the church. The resultant socialization of women to submission, to see themselves as lesser persons through the formation they are put through, as well as the structures that govern us in the church, is what makes them vulnerable to various forms of exploitation, violence, and sexual abuse. The inordinate superiority of men over women in the church to act in the name of God as mediators of God's grace through the administration of the sacraments automatically put women in a position of subservience and inferiority. What do we have as a result? The domination and submission of male over female in marriage and in all areas of church leadership. In conclusion, I would like to say the credibility of the Catholic Church as an institution of moral and spiritual integrity is seriously eroded by clergy sex abuse. Advocates and victims have lost trust and turned to other sources of spiritual nourishment. Religious power has been perverted by the leadership that has protected clergy, who have destroyed rather than given people the gift of life that Jesus came to give. This brings into question the rise or death of Catholic priesthood. Is it about self-gratifying power or servant leadership? Women and advocates are forming groups to support victims of abuse in the church, whose cries has received no justice, while abusers and their abettors continue to stay in positions of leadership. The Catholic Church has acquired so much of power that is able to exert even political and social clout to protect itself, while victims are left in the cold to suffer humiliation and mental trauma from the abuse. These organizations are seen as adversaries rather than as partners in finding solution to the problem of clergy abuse. If the leaders of the Catholic Church call themselves Alter Christus, they have failed to be Christ in addressing clergy abuse and giving justice to victims. A solution can be found only when the stories of survivors are listened to and efforts are made to go to the root of the problem and to address it. The church has also to recognize that in the 21st century, it can no longer function as a patriarchal institution without partnering with women in mission like Jesus did. Unless women are made part of the decision making and the three arms of governance, legislative, executive, and judiciary, are separated and made independent of each other, women will not succeed in getting justice or their human rights recognized in the Catholic Church. Thank you.